They all laughed when my husband left me pregnant and broke. It wasn't just laughter, it was that smug kind, the kind that says, "We knew this would happen." I can still see his face the day he walked out. I was standing in our kitchen, belly heavy with our child, while he stuffed his clothes into a duffel bag. His excuse: he wasn't ready to be a father and had found someone else who understood him better. I begged him to stay, begged him to think of the baby we had made together. He smirked and said, "Sorry, you are not my ideal kind of wife. I don't see us having a future. Maybe you'll meet someone your type in future." Then he slammed the door, leaving me in pieces. The betrayal burned deeper because I had given up so much for him. I had dropped out of college to support his dreams, working late shifts while he bounced between jobs, promising me a brighter future that never came. And when that future demanded responsibility, he chose the easy way out. He chose freedom, another woman, and a chance to leave me drowning. The news spread quickly. Small towns have a way of carrying whispers faster than the wind. Neighbors shook their heads, pretending to pity me, but I saw the gleam in their eyes. They had always thought I was too proud, too sure of myself when I married him. Now I was the girl they could all point to and say, "See, she thought she could change him? Look how that turned out." My own cousin told me I had ruined my life by trapping the wrong man. And his family? They didn't just laugh, they celebrated my downfall. His sister stopped me in the grocery store one afternoon, eyed my swollen belly, and said with a smile, "Good luck raising that baby alone. Don't expect a dime from us." And she was right. He never sent a penny. He vanished as though we had never existed. The weeks after he left were a haze of fear and exhaustion. I was 24, unemployed, and about to bring a child into the world with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a heart shattered into pieces. I swallowed my pride and picked up whatever work I could, cleaning houses, babysitting, waiting tables. Some nights, my ankles ached so badly from standing on them all day that I cried in the shower so no one would hear. And yet, the hardest part wasn't the work or the hunger. It was the constant humiliation. Every time I walked through town, I felt the stares burning into me, the whispers behind cupped hands. To them, I wasn't just abandoned, I was entertainment. But then Caleb was born. The moment I held him in my arms, tiny and perfect, everything shifted. His father had walked away, but my son was here, and he needed me. I looked down at his little face and made a promise. No matter how hard life got, I would never let him feel unloved, unwanted, or unprotected. His cry became my reason to fight, his smile the fuel I needed to keep moving forward. Raising him alone wasn't easy. We lived in a small, drafty apartment with peeling paint and thin walls that let in every noise from the street. I worked mornings at a diner, afternoons cleaning offices, and nights studying at our rickety kitchen table while Caleb colored beside me. People saw a struggling single mom scraping by on tips, but they didn't see the textbooks stacked under the table or the late nights I spent poring over business manuals I borrowed from the library. I refused to let my life be defined by what my ex had done. If I had to claw my way up from the bottom, I would. Family gatherings were the worst. Every time I showed up, I braced myself for the sideways glances, the passive-aggressive comments. "Still single, huh? That diner doesn't pay much, does it? Kids need a real father figure, you know." I learned to swallow the sting of their words, but inside, I burned. Their laughter, their judgment, it became fuel. Each smirk, each cruel remark pushed me harder. I swore that one day they wouldn't be laughing. One day they'd see me standing higher than they ever thought possible. Back then, though, all I had was grit, survival, and a dream I barely dared to speak aloud. I didn't know how or when things would change. I just knew they had to. And what I couldn't see at the time was that all those nights of tears, all those long shifts, all those quiet hours spent studying while the world slept, they were leading me to a moment that would change everything. But for now, all I knew was pain, determination, and a little boy who gave me every reason to keep going. Years passed, and Caleb grew alongside my struggles. By the time he was 5, I had mastered the art of juggling 3 lives in one. The tired waitress who smiled through rude customers, the cleaner who scrubbed offices late at night, and the student who pored over business books while her child slept. People still whispered, still judged, but I had grown numb to it. Their laughter no longer broke me. It shaped me. It was during one of those endless diner shifts that I first saw him. At the time, I didn't even know who he was. To me, he was just another customer, well-dressed, polished, the kind of man who clearly didn't belong in a rundown diner on the edge of town. He sat quietly in the corner booth, laptop open, papers spread out in neat stacks. Unlike the others, he didn't bark orders or snap his fingers. He looked me in the eye when he asked for coffee. He even thanked me, like I was a human being instead of just another face in an apron. At first, I didn't think much of it. Men in suits came and went, but he kept coming back. Every Thursday evening, like clockwork, he'd be there in the corner, working late while the world outside wound down. I found myself wondering why. Didn't men like him have fancy offices and assistants? Why this greasy diner with flickering neon lights? I never asked. I just refilled his coffee and kept moving. One night, as I wiped down his table, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever get tired?" I laughed softly, thinking he was joking. "All the time," I said, balancing a tray of dirty dishes on my hip. But when I looked at him, I realized he wasn't teasing. He was studying me, like he could see the weight I carried. "Most people complain about working one job," he said. "I've watched you juggle 10 things at once without missing a beat." His words startled me. No one had ever noticed. People usually just saw me as the girl who got left behind. But he saw effort. He saw strength. And that alone shook me. Weeks turned into months. Our conversations grew. Nothing personal at first, just casual remarks about the weather, books, or the long hours we both kept. But slowly, he asked about Caleb. I told him my son loved to draw, that he was the reason I kept pushing forward. He listened, really listened, in a way I wasn't used to. I guarded myself, though. I wasn't about to trust another man with the pieces of my broken heart. Then one night, Caleb fell sick while I was on shift. Panic set in as I called around, trying to find someone to cover for me. When I explained to my manager, he shrugged and said, "Figure it out or don't come back." My chest tightened. I couldn't lose the job. I needed every dollar. But my son came first. I grabbed my coat, ready to storm out and take the risk. That's when the man in the corner booth stood up and spoke. "She'll be back tomorrow," he told my manager, his tone firm, unquestionable. The manager's face turned pale. I didn't understand why, but he nodded without protest. And just like that, I was free to run to my son's side. The next day, I found out who he really was. His name was Jonathan Hayes, billionaire investor, owner of half the businesses in town, including the diner where I worked. I nearly dropped my tray when I realized the man I'd been serving coffee to was one of the most powerful men in the city. But what shocked me more was how he treated me afterward, exactly the same as before. No arrogance, no flaunting of his wealth, just genuine kindness, respect, and a steady presence that slowly chipped away at my walls. Jonathan didn't swoop in with promises or gifts. Instead, he asked questions no one else cared to ask. "How are you holding up? What are you studying these days?" He encouraged me when I mentioned my late-night reading. One evening, he slid a business card across the table. "If you're serious about finance," he said, "come by my office. I could use someone with your grit." My first instinct was suspicion. Was this pity? Charity? I almost tore up the card. But something in his eyes told me it wasn't about saving me. It was about seeing what I could become. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the crack in the door that life had been waiting to open. I was still cautious, still guarded. But for the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt real, and it terrified me. Taking that business card from Jonathan felt like holding a door handle to a room I wasn't sure I deserved to enter. For weeks, it sat untouched in my purse while I debated with myself. What if it was pity? What if I walked in and embarrassed myself? But then I remembered the promises I made at that kitchen table, late at night with Caleb by my side. I hadn't survived this long just to keep waiting tables forever. So one morning, I put on my best thrift store blazer, kissed Caleb goodbye, and walked into the tallest building in the city, Jonathan's headquarters. I expected to be laughed out of the place. Instead, Jonathan greeted me himself, calm and warm as always. He didn't hand me a cushy job or treat me like a charity case. He started me at the bottom in an entry-level assistant position. "Earn it," he said. And I did. I worked harder than I ever thought possible, applying everything I'd learned from years of study. For the first time in my life, someone wasn't waiting for me to fail. They were waiting for me to rise. Months turned into years, and I climbed step by step. I became more confident, sharper, stronger. Jonathan guided me, but he never carried me. And through it all, he treated Caleb like he was his own. He showed up to school plays, helped with homework, even sat with him during doctor visits. Slowly, without even realizing it, I began to trust again. Not just him, but myself. I was no longer the abandoned, broken girl everyone pitied. I was a woman building something solid, brick by brick. When Jonathan asked me to marry him, it wasn't with fireworks or spectacle. It was in the quiet of our living room, Caleb asleep on the couch between us. He simply said, "You've built this life with me piece by piece. Let's keep building it together." Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. For the first time in years, my heart felt whole. Caleb didn't just have a mother anymore, he had a family. Life changed in ways I could hardly recognize. We moved into a beautiful home, not because I needed riches, but because it was safe, warm, and ours. I was no longer scraping by on tips. I was part of Jonathan's company, respected for my ideas and work ethic. People who once dismissed me now asked for my input. But the real change wasn't money or titles, it was dignity. I could walk into any room with my head held high. And then came the moment fate had been preparing me for all along. I was attending a company event with Jonathan, one of those grand conferences where employees from across his businesses gathered. As I mingled, shaking hands, I spotted a face that nearly made my stomach drop. My ex-husband. He looked older, worn out, his once arrogant grin replaced with the bitterness of someone who had chased shortcuts and lost. He was there as an employee, a low-level manager for one of Jonathan's subsidiaries. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay composed. He didn't notice me at first, but when Jonathan introduced me formally as his wife, the room seemed to freeze. My ex's eyes widened, his face draining of color. Behind him, I spotted his sister, the same woman who had mocked me in the grocery store all those years ago. Her mouth fell open, words stuck in her throat. The people who had laughed when I was left with nothing were now standing in awe, realizing that the billionaire they worked for was my husband, the stepfather to the child they once dismissed as fatherless. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. But I didn't. I simply smiled politely, shook their hands, and moved on. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. Proof that I had survived, risen, and built a life they could never take from me. Of course, the whispers started again, but this time they weren't mocking. They were stunned. They wanted to know how I had done it, how the girl they had written off was now standing at the top. I didn't bother answering. My life, my family, my dignity, they were answer enough. And as I stood beside Jonathan, Caleb smiling proudly at our side, I realized the laughter that once haunted me was gone. In its place was silence. Respectful, uneasy silence from the very people who thought I'd never make it. When I walked into that boardroom, all eyes turned to me. My ex-husband, Mark, sat at the far end of the table with his smug little smirk, the same one he wore the day he walked out on me. His new wife, Tasha, perched beside him like some kind of trophy. And scattered around the table were faces I recognized from years back. People who once called me pathetic, who laughed when I struggled. They were employees now, employees of my husband. "Gentlemen, ladies," Daniel said smoothly, his hand brushing mine under the table. "This is my wife, Claire. You'll be reporting to her on all upcoming projects." The silence was so sharp it could have cut glass. A couple of them nearly choked on their water. Mark froze. His smirk melted off his face so fast it was almost comical. "Your wife?" he croaked, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "Yes," Daniel said, his tone cool and controlled. "She'll be overseeing the transition of this branch. I trust her judgment completely." He leaned back, calm as ever, while I sat there, my heart thudding with a satisfaction I'd been denied for years. Tasha's jaw tightened. Mark's eyes darted around, like he was trying to process a nightmare in broad daylight. These were the same people who said I'd amount to nothing, who whispered that my son would grow up poor, fatherless, and pitied. And now, they were bowing their heads in a room where I held the power. After the meeting, I didn't leave right away. I let them squirm. I let Mark fidget with his tie and Tasha glare at me like daggers could undo my existence. Finally, when the tension was unbearable, I leaned forward, clasped my hands, and said quietly, "Funny how life works, isn't it? You laughed when I was alone and broke, and yet, here you are, working for the billionaire who happens to be my husband." The look on Mark's face, pure, raw humiliation, was everything I had imagined on my darkest nights. He had traded his family for a fling, left me to pick up the pieces, and now he had to face me every day knowing I was untouchable. Later that week, word spread through the company like wildfire. Employees whispered in the hallways, shocked at the revelation. I wasn't the pitiful girl abandoned by her husband anymore. I was the woman running the show. Mark tried, of course. He pulled me aside one afternoon, desperation creeping into his voice. Claire, listen. Maybe we can talk. I made mistakes, but we have history. We have a son. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, You don't get to play father when it suits you. My son has a real dad now, one who chose him, not one who walked away. Then I turned my back on him, the way he once did to me. The sweetest part wasn't just the wealth or the power, it was the justice. It was watching those who mocked me, forced to respect me. It was seeing the man who abandoned me, forced to swallow his pride every time he clocked in under my husband's name. Did I forgive him? No. Forgiveness would have been a gift, and he didn't deserve it. What I gave him instead was silence. Silence and the daily reminder that the woman he thought would crumble had risen higher than he could ever reach. That's what real revenge looks like. Not screaming, not begging, just living so well that your enemies choke on their regret. And every time I step into that office, holding Daniel's hand, I know I've won. So when people ask me what happened to the man who left me pregnant and broke, I smile and say, he works for us now. And believe me, nothing feels sweeter than that. If this story struck a chord with you, don't just leave quietly, hit subscribe. More stories of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate payback are waiting. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next one.